Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're just pausing for a second as all the participants enter the chat. Welcome. Welcome. I should learn a few more ways to say welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're still waiting for a few more people to enter and then we'll start the chat today. Welcome. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter the chat and then we'll start. Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter and then we'll start the chat. Welcome. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter and then we'll start the chat. Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter and then we'll start the chat. Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to enter and we'll be ready to start in a moment. Okay, I think most of us have gathered, so welcome to Workshop Wednesday Fireside Chat. I'm Taylor Williams. I'm the New York Theater Workshop's casting director. We're broadcasting this webinar from Zoom and simultaneously live streaming on Facebook Live, and we're so happy to have you all here in this virtual space. This Fireside Chat and all of the workshop's virtual programming is offered free and available to the entire NYTW community. If you are in a position to support our work, including continuing to pay artists and our staff, we hope that you will consider donating. You'll find a link to donate in the chat if you're joining us on Zoom and in the comments if you're turning into Facebook Live. The conversation today will last around an hour. For the first 45 minutes or so, Jim Nicola will moderate a conversation with Penny Arcade, then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you have a technical or logistical question about the platform, please share via the Q&A tab vis-a-vis Zoom or comment vis-a-vis Facebook. When we get to the Q&A portion, feel free to share your questions for the panelists via the same mechanism. We'll do our very best to get to all the questions that we can in the time that we have. And now, please allow me to introduce Jim Nicola, New York Theater Workshop's Artistic Director, and Penny Arcade, the Queen of Underground Performance.
Hello.
Hello.
How exciting.
It is indeed. So, Penny, the first thing I think we should probably discuss is the current situation that we're in.
Right.
And knowing you not so very long, but feeling like I know you pretty well now.
Yeah.
If ever there was a person that I thought was a social person, a person who connected to people in a very visceral and real way.
Yeah.
Here we are, you in your living room, me in mine, and all of us in our own private, separate, isolated spaces. What does that feel like to you?
Well, hi, everybody. First of all, hi, welcome to my house. You know, I've done performances in my apartment for the general public. I've always had a big relationship with the general public. So this has been part of my practice. I did what is called social practice, you know, since 1985 by giving my phone number out to the entire audience and maintaining a relationship with my audience. And I think for many of us who've been around for a long time, I know for you, Jim, certainly a lot of people who are tuning in right now, we're all getting a lot of triggering back to the 80s AIDS epidemic. And it's not so much memories, but the feeling, that feeling of the boot was going to fall, when, what was going to be the next thing, who was going to get sick next. I mean, I just lost one of my closest friends and an important person in avant-garde art, Hal Wilner. He had a cold, okay? He was sick as in a cold, not sick as in dying. So I think we're all quite worried because we really, you know, like I was just saying to you, this gives globalization a whole new name, you know, like, and also, you know, if you're a little bit paranoid, although remember, William Burroughs said, paranoia is having all the facts. How can this be happening simultaneously everywhere in the world? How does that work? How come the Ebola virus didn't happen everywhere in the world? Or how come SARS didn't happen everywhere in the world at exactly the same time? Okay, I know the answer. The answer is this is a unique novel virus. Okay, maybe. But I think that for sure, anybody listening to this, May 1st, we all had a different reality going on about our present and the future. And now that's all up for grabs. We don't know where we are. We don't know where we're going. We don't know how long this will last. And we do not know what the outcome is going to be. And you know that I have a long-running video project called the Lower East Side Biography Project.
Yes.
My longtime collaborator, Steve Zentner, and I've been doing since 1999. It broadcasts every week since 1999. And in it, we interview highly self-individuated people because I have always taken my wages in people. I like smart people. I always want to know who's the smartest guy in the room, which is why I have this relationship with Jim Nicola. I had to wait 31 years to have it, even though you're only 5 blocks away from me in the East Village. All right, I'm not gonna bust your chops too much there, because better late than never. But I did an interview with my friend Bobby Beers, and I said, what do you think the future of art is going to be? And he said, well, we know what the future of art is not going to be. And I said, what is it not going to be? And he said, agonized self-expression. He said, agonized self-expression is out. I said, okay. He said, that's what we hated about the beatniks. Like, you know, you had to have something wrong with you in order to make art. And I said, well, what is it going to be? He said, we don't know. He said, but I believe that in the future, the artist will be called upon to be a painkiller, that life will become very difficult, and that art will be called upon to assuage sorrow. Now, that has always been one of my roles. I believe that we go to the theater to experience that which we are unwilling or unable to experience in real life. And I create theater to break down isolation in myself and in other people, to assuage sorrow. So here we are, you know, this is today, April 8th, first day of Passover. I mean, it's very curious to me, the synchronicity of this, because it's Passover. So we're waiting for this plague to pass over us right now. Then, what the audience doesn't know, but which I'm super excited to talk about, is that you know, Jim and I have known each other since December of 2016, when you, Jim, came to see my play, Longing Less Longer at St. Anne's Warehouse, where Susan Feldman stepped so far out of the ordinary as to present my work in a more mainstream way, shall we say. And since then, you've become a fan of my writing, which is, you know, for me, it's like I can't even express the deep meaning and gratitude that I have for you. No, I'm serious, because, you know, all of us, there's young people right now who are listening to this. I bet there's a lot of young artists who are listening to this. And you hope, all of us are, we're not that different from each other. All of us hope that there's going to be people that we respect in the audience who are going to recognize our writing. They're going to recognize our work. They're going to recognize our theatrical vision. And you know what? For a lot of people, that never happens. It doesn't matter about the quality of your work, because art is not a meritocracy like the sports world, where the very best becomes the most famous. Like, nobody cares if you hit the ball the furthest in baseball, if you run the most miles. Hear me with the sports analogies that I don't know. You know, if you're the best football player, nobody really cares about your personality. You know what I mean? You can be like, have like an abrasive personality. Nobody's going to say you're not the best. But in theater, that is not true, you know? And I mean, we could have a much longer talk about the politics of art, which I figure heavily in my work. But for me, I waited for a long time to have someone who I respected in the particular way that I respect Jim Nicola, as somebody with a theater history that is as long as mine. I've been doing theater for 52 years. You started studying theater at the same time as I got involved in the Playhouse of the Ridiculous. So I was an apprentice, you were an apprentice. We had the same journeyman experience in our 20s. You know, I toured in theater. I was in Spain. I was in a puppet live theater group. In the mid 70s, I ran a theater, a 300-seat theater in Pittsfield, Maine. I brought rock and roll to the Maine Festival before I came back in New York in 1981 to start doing my own work. So you and I have we've walked a similar road, not exactly doing the same thing, because you did have a background in directing, and you decided to focus on being an artistic director, a curator, a producer, with a special interest in new writing. You know, the thing that kind of fascinated me about New York Theater Workshop, because I remember when it was the old truck and warehouse.
Right.
I go back, I go really back, you know. The thing that always fascinated me about New York Theater Workshop when it started, you know, was the fact that it was interested both in new writing and in traditional theater, you know, because I've never been against, you know, people think that I'm some kind of belligerent, weird, wild woman, you know, and as you can hear me, I'm a very measured, kind of introverted person, you know. People say, well, I saw you on stage, you're not introverted. But introversion and extroversion is how you process material. So for me to have someone like you with your connections, so much of your work has gone to Broadway, which, you know, I just want to point this out because Hal Wilner, who just passed away from COVID-19, he was another person who spoke about, the only other person I knew who spoke about this. And that was, it's only a fairly recent phenomena, I would say really pretty much the 70s, when avant-garde work was not part of the mainstream. It was not disconnected before. You know, it was just the more visionary, the more progressive end of the arts. And I think that in your tenure at New York Theater Workshop, you have continued that lineage. So you don't really make a distinction, you know, between new writing or new forms or bringing in, you know, a more traditional type of theater program. So when I found out you were in the audience at Longing Lasts Longer, I don't know, we can ask Steve, I might have cried, you know, because it was something I wanted for so long.
It was pretty sad.
Well, it was something I wanted for so long, was to have, like, I didn't know you, although of course I'll say you did have that O Solo Mio festival for 30 years that I never participated in, but just saying, but the fact that you zeroed in on my writing, and that we, as soon as we met, we could really, you know, I came back to New York in 1981 because I wanted artistic community, you know. In my interview with John Vaccaro, who was my mentor from the Playhouse The Ridiculous, I started with him when I was just turned 18. In our interview for the Lower East Side Biography Project, John said, I liked artists. I liked the kind of conversations I had with artists. And that is what artistic community has always been. And by the way, Penny Arcade axiom number 1, the audience is part of that artistic community. They are not some wallet on the side. You know, all that great work that got done in the 80s, that was the new work that got telegraphed all over the world, that really is East Village performance, that got telegraphed all over the world, that was created because we had the midwifery of a phenomenal audience that was there to experience new work. And I think the success of New York Theater Workshop is that you have a devoted audience that is there. And what people don't understand is that the audience is not stupid. The audience can go where you go. And all the work I made, and I made a lot of work. I mean, I'm very proud of that. Even though I was marginalized because I'm a woman, because I'm working class, because I'm queer. I mean, there's a million reasons why my work has been marginalized. And also because I'm from the 60s. So I was, you know, in the 80s when everything took off in a different way, I was more associated with 60s theater, with the Playhouse The Ridiculous, with Jack Smith, with Andy Warhol. I was a Warhol superstar as a teenager. I remember when I tried to get an emerging arts grant from the Jerome Festival, the Jerome Foundation, 1985. That was the year they launched it. And word came back to me that my name had been brought up to get one of these grants, and people said, she's not an emerging artist. She worked with Andy Warhol. And I was like, what does my having been in Andy Warhol movies when I was 19 have to do with the work I'm writing and making now? But, you know, what are you going to do? You know, people are self-absorbed and they don't think. So.
May I jump in here?
Yeah, please do. You know me.
I hesitate to interrupt this flow because it's all so very interesting. You are an amazing mind and presence. But I want to say, first of all, that you have a Patreon page where there's an archive of your work that people can go and see whatever they want to see. So, and I would recommend it. I just spent last night looking at an early piece of Penny's from 90s, 80s?
What?
La Miseria?
1991.
91, which is something that Penny has been after me to watch for a long time, and I watched pieces of it and finally sat and watched it last night. And it is the sort of piece that connects us in a certain way, which is we're both Italian Americans, born 10 days apart, but in different suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut. So we have and from there, when we discovered that, there have been up till a few days ago, a sequence of discoveries of coincident things that are eerie and bizarre and wonderful. But I want to talk a little bit about where you came from.
Right.
And I'm going to read a little bit of a bio on the back of your fabulous book, Bad Reputation.
Right. Send me a text.
Yep. It says, a runaway at 13, a reform school graduate at 16, a performer in the legendary New York City Playhouse of the Ridiculous at 17, and an escapee from Andy Warhol's factory scene at 19. Penny Arcade emerged in the 1980s as a primal force on the New York art scene and an originator of what came to be called performance art. Arcade's brand of high camp and street smart punk rock cabaret showmanship has been winning over international audiences ever since. So there's quite an adventure in there. I want to have a clip from La Miseria, which will show you a little bit about where she came from, the family she was born into in New Britain, Connecticut in 1950. So you can see the Penny.
Okay, I want to just say something to set it up. And that is La Miseria has 33 people in it, age 8 to 80. And it's a critique of misogyny, racism, homophobia, and the Catholic Church in the age of AIDS as it happened in my life. And this scene that you're going to see is La Miseria is a play within a performance piece. So even though I'm called a performance artist, what I do is experimental theater. So here's one of the ways when I break the reality of this Easter Sunday dinner. That's what I was talking about, the synchronicity of when we're doing this, where I break the reality of the play. So here it is. And this is why I write theater. It's all right here.
Great. Clip coming in just 1 second.
So I was at my mother's house, and I was watching these reruns of Laverne and Shirley. Now, I never watched very much television, so I'd never seen Laverne and Shirley. And I realized while I was watching it, the reason why the show was so successful, because it was another working class comedy.
You know, you are too much. You are working class. That's what you are.
I know.
Well, then shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
All I said is that Laverne and Shirley is successful, like Archie Bunker.
Hey,
It's a working.
Go back to the real world.
Stop it!
You are working class. That's what you are.
I know that.
No.
What did you say? I can't believe this. What, we're gonna have a fight about a sitcom?
No, we're not gonna have a fucking fight about a sitcom. We're gonna have a fight about your bullshit. Why don't you take your bullshit right back to New York, huh? You know something? You're living in a fucking fantasy world. You know that? You want to be an artist? No, I don't shut up. You want to write? Let me tell you something. Let me clue you into something. Art soup is for rich people. And you're not one of them. You know what? Besides that, nobody wants to fucking hear from you, huh? Just shut your mouth. And anything that you want to say. All right? Oh.
What did she say?
Well, and I forgot to say that your birth name is Susanna Ventura.
Yes,
Yep.
it is. Yes, it is. And
Yep.
Ventura means adventure. And I am an adventurous. And I am first generation. So I'm from an immigrant background where there is, you can see, I mean, that is verbatim. We didn't say this, but all my work is nonfiction. I don't write fiction. So every single play of the 16 full-length plays that I have written are all things that actually happened to me. And if they didn't happen to me, they are things that I was told first person. You know, it's from, I've worked with, it's really funny because I've worked with all the things that, you know, people get massive grants for. Oral history, when Steve and I started a Lower East Side biography project in 1999, oral history, way before we were the first, you know, and then working with social practice where the audience is included in my work. They are honored in my work. So it's an interesting element that the world doesn't recognize working class intellectuals. So you brought up how I was in reform school when I was 14. I ran away from home when I was 13. And apparently you don't get to run away from home and stay away for 6 weeks and go home again. You get put away. And I got put away.
In the state of Connecticut.
In Hartford, Hartford, Connecticut. So Jim and I are from 15 miles apart, and he says a suburb of Hartford, but what he really means is a working class town, Manchester, an old factory town named after Manchester, England, and I, New Britain, Connecticut. And I got put in Sacred Heart Academy for Wayward Girls in Hartford on Sisson Avenue, which was run by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, and I wrote my first play there when I was 14 years old. And
not that far from Tony Romano's Steakhouse.
Not that far from Tony Romano's Steakhouse, which was the gay bar in Hartford, Connecticut that I went to and Jim went to in 1966, 65, 66. We were probably in the same room as young teenagers. And it,
bearing in mind that in Connecticut at the time, the legal drinking age was 21.
That's right. And we still got to go to these gay bars. And I often say that that is where the walls fell between the classes. And that's part of the reason why I can be someone with really an 8th grade reform school education who is as intellectual and as a refined thinker as I am, because in the gay bars of that time, we were all refugees, whether you were from an Ivy League family, from a wealthy billionaire class, or whether you were from the underclass or the working class. And that is when high and low thinking, high and low art mixed. And that's why we got the art forms that came into the 70s was from the gay world and those gay bars. And that Tony Romano's steakhouse figures prominently in my new work in progress, Old Queen, which you also graced us with your presence to come and see.
Oh, that's an amazing piece.
That must have shocked you, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a stunning moment, truly, truly. You mentioned yesterday something that happened in 7th grade that I think is a really little interesting tidbit to share. It was some reading comprehension thing.
Oh, yeah, I said that that in 7th grade, so that's like 1962, I guess, I had the highest score for reading comprehension in the state of Connecticut. So, you know, I'm somebody who fell from grace, and, you know, I'm very close friends with Marianne Faithfull, the singer. And we've been friends for since 1992, when she came to see my show, Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore, my sex and censorship show at the Village Gate, because it turned out that her niece, who was 17, was a stripper in my show. And Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore is a show that it hit the zeitgeist twice, in the 90s and then again recently in 2018, 2019. And it is a combination of political humanism. I can't believe the phone is ringing. Who asked? We're going to have to wait for it to go. Think of it as a soundtrack behind my voice.
Yeah.
And Marianne came and saw that show, and we've been friends ever since. But it's only in the past 3 years that I came to understand through her experience that when she was branded as bad in the late 60s, at the same time, there was a big bust at Keith Richards' mansion, where she was found wrapped in a fur rug. That at that time, that made the Rolling Stones, it made them the most famous band in the world, and it made her a slut and a non-entity in the face of the world, which is how they treat girls, you know? And so this is a thing with me, that the way I was maligned, I mean, you didn't get put away in working class mill town, factory town, Connecticut, when you're 14 for 2 years and not have everybody think that you had a baby, you know? So I was kind of, I went from being in honors, you know, honors classes, being like, you know, the smartest, one of the smartest kids, you know, in the town, to, and especially in my Italian family, vergogna, you know, I had brought shame to my family. So I was never, I mean, I had a hard time anyways, because I was the first one, and any immigrant kids who are listening to this, this broadcast, you'll have had this experience. I was the first one in my family born in America. So I was an outsider in my own family. And that is a key element in Old Queen, because I'm an immigrant, Italian immigrant, and I migrated to the gay world. That's where I found a home. That's where I found recognition. Everything that made me wrong in the real world made me right in the gay bar every single night. My being opinionated, my being outspoken, my being funny, my being smart, my having a different kind of point of view. And this went on, and I ended up in New York in the 60s, and I was always at the at the knee of every smart gay guy in the room. You know, I wanted to know. And
should we take a look at this next clip, which will give us, our viewers, a little sense of that? This is from Longing Lasts Longer, yes?
Okay, this is, yeah. Is that what
Am
you're
I
doing?
right?
Or a good
This is
study?
the piece about New York, coming to New
Yeah.
York.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is important for New York right now.
Yeah. So this is coming from working class Hartford and what we saw to this.
Great.
Let's
Clip
roll
come-
that clip.
One sec.
Okay.
So I was
Sorry.
It's okay.
straight to arms, early lane, Georgia. We can find many things in other people, but solitude and sanctuary are not among them. No matter how kind, how non-judgmental, or even how silent, not even a lover can hold our solitude or offer a sanctuary. Solitude cannot be shared. It can only shelter one. And we must never make another person into a sanctuary. I know that many people cannot fathom New York City as a place of solitude or sanctuary. But for some of us, for many of us, that cacophonous, scurrying, chaotic place held a holy peace. The Asphalt Jungle, they called it in the 1960s. Boundaried by danger and risk, physical, emotional, cultural, intellectual risk. And we, who needed that raw, unmapped landscape, craved it with a desperation as great as the bleakness that emanated from its haunted streets. You know you own me. Lonely 22-story block. That bleakness flowed and mapped the desolation of our own hearts. The way the sea washes back into its tributaries.
That's great. That is so great. I think what you see there emerging, at least for me, one of the things that I feel we have in common, expressed in very different ways in different lives, is the sense of our role is to instigate community, to protect community, to make a gathering together, and to give a community a sense of itself and who it is and what it believes in, what its values and ideas are. And I, in my, as you recall, in my youth, I was aspiring to be a pastor. And I often consult the great books as a pastor would consult the Bible. And I came up with 3 quotes, and I'm going to just read them to you.
Thank you.
From people that are way smarter than me, and see in this area how you respond to this. This first one is from Emile Zola. If you asked me what I came to do in the world, in this world, I, an artist, will answer you, I'm here to live out loud. Then, from Martin Luther King Jr., human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. And the final one is from Albert Einstein, who says, art is standing with one hand extended into the universe and one hand extended into the world, and letting ourselves be a conduit for passing energy.
I love that. This phone is going to drive me insane. Sorry about that, people. So yes, what beautiful quotes. And you know, it is true. I have a pastoral element to my work, and it always has been. And you know, as far as speaking out loud, you see, this is one of the things. I come from a culture, Southern Italian immigrant culture, where women are not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to have an opinion. That's why I love Jews. When I ran away from home, when I was gone for those 6 weeks, I was at Old Saybrook, Connecticut, at the beach with New York Jews. My life was saved by New York Jews. Imagine an entire cuisine without tomato sauce. And Jews like smart kids. They like even girls. You can be a girl and be smart, which doesn't fit in Southern Italian culture. So yes, you know, I think a lot of people think that there's been a lot of confusion around me because I'm seen as a belligerent, abrasive person simply for speaking my truth. And I'm saying because I learned this late in life. I was in Turkey in 2010, and I found a book by Foucault, who I had never read. And I opened it up, and he talked about parahista. And a parahista, from the Greek, a parahista is a person who's a truth teller. And there are 3 elements that you must have to be a parahista. 1, you tell the truth from your own point of view, and you say that it's from your own point of view. 2, there has to be loss involved. You must lose. You have the threat of death by speaking out loud to the ruler, or like me, you know, you become really marginalized in the not-for-profit world because people are afraid of what you might say. And the 3rd thing is you tell the truth from a sense of responsibility, from a sense of contribution. And my work, you know, I wasn't mentored. I say I was mentored. I wasn't mentored because I was the one thing that gay men needed me to be that I couldn't be was a boy. So I picked up the shards of genius that were dropped by gay men, you know, and I cobbled them together and educated myself. The creatively maladjusted, all new forms come from people who don't fit in. You know, this is a reality that's well known. I always say the best thing that can happen to an artist, which is what happened to me, was that nobody was interested in my work till I was in my 40s. And they weren't interested in my work till I did Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore. And they weren't interested in America. They were interested in the UK. They were interested in Australia. They were interested in Vienna. But I, being that inveterate outsider, wanted to be accepted. So instead of moving to Australia, where I was, you know, asked by the former prime minister to move as an artist, or moving to, you know, anywhere in Europe, like in Germany, that was really writing about my work in a really respectful way, I kept trying to be accepted in America. I kept trying to be accepted in New York. And I know that's so much from wanting to be accepted by my family and wanting to have been accepted at school and being an outsider. So this maladjustment, you know, like Leonard Cohen said it best, didn't he say everything best? The cracks, that's how the light gets in. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And then the thing of being one hand, Einstein's, of being one hand into the universe, one hand into the world. I adore that. I never heard that before. And I have my own little way of saying that, which is that in my work, the audience has always produced my work. We always hoped that some producer would come out of somewhere and produce our work. We've had very little of being produced in New York. We were produced by Susan Feldman. Thank you very much, Susan Feldman. And with Longing Lasts Longer. But I always say the audience holds one end of the tightrope and I'm on the other end, and I don't believe it if the audience doesn't believe it. And I walk that tightrope, and that tightrope is held by the audience. And it is my job as an artist to bring in things from the ether, to bring them from the universe, from the universal mind. And we are all connected. We are all so connected. Like even at this moment, you know, 112 people are out there listening. And here's these like, you know, kind of public confessions and then private confessions between Jim and I, you know, and I love Jim because I can say to Jim, you know, where the fuck were you for 30 years when I needed you to produce my work? But like I said, most artists stop developing at the point they get the attention. And I know myself, if I had gotten attention when I was 35, which I thought my work deserved when I was 35, I would have stopped because I'm like everybody else. I just wanted the attention. I used to say, and I'll tell you this is funny. I used to say, this is as good as I get in 1986. I don't get better than this. If I don't get attention for my work now, then there's no point, because this is as good as I get. I could not imagine being more. And all of you listening to this right now, let's not just talk about theater. Let's talk about our lives. We can't imagine being more. We're in our own way. You know, there's that riff I just recently heard, you know, if you believe in your limitations, you get stuck with them. So what happened to me was I didn't get the attention I wanted when I was in 1986. Didn't get it. In 1990, I wrote 4 full-length shows. 4. It was the year I was 40. I wrote Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore. I wrote La Miseria. I wrote Invitation to the Beginning of the End of the World that was presented by La Mama. And I wrote Based on a True Story that was also presented at La Mama. And all of these works focused a great deal on AIDS, and were from my point of view, and were all based on my work. So, you know, this is there is a reason why, Jim, you and I are meeting now. You know, you've been making work. We're both in the last stretch of our careers, which isn't to say our careers are over by a long shot. Marianne Faithfull and I talk about this a lot, about the last stage of life is about completion of character. So we're meeting each other, you know, as colleagues. We're meeting each other when we have the most to offer the other, you know, which is spectacular.
Yep.
And Jim, I just want to say this to the public, because I want you to know what kind of artistic director you have at New York Theater Workshop. Jim said to me, well, you know, Penny, I want this to be for you. Like, what do you want to get out of this? And I said, Jim, please talk about my writing. And I said to him, like, just the fact that Penny Arcade and Jim Nicola in conversation is being sent to every email in your Rolodex, to every funder you have, to every group, every theater, every audience member, it sends a huge message, because I'm very well known. People know my name. They just don't know what I do, you know? So
now they do.
Now they do. It's really wonderful. And I want to just invite you all to join the Penny Arcade Performance Patreon. We're putting all my work there. And you know, you may not know this, but I am one of the few artists that videoed all my work starting in 1985. So as I'm saying, I was an early adapter to not only the internet, but to video and to computers. And we videoed all my work. In the 80s, I used to say I was anti-product, because I wanted people to come and see me live. But I did make it so that I could present my product at a later date. So we have over Steve Zentner, my longtime collaborator, great Steve Zentner, who, by the way, in his own right, was an architect, who was a video producer, who came to me in 1992 to shoot live video, who then became my dramaturg, and who, way before there was any architect in the theater, excuse me, people, excuse me, where's his MacArthur? Steve Zentner came and brought his background in architecture to my theater, and we became our theater. And that social practice was influenced and educated by Steve's background in the concepts from architecture of including the audience. So, you know, we would love you to be part of our Patreon. We have 2,300 unique videos of performances, of talks, of special events that I did, you know.
Is the recordings from the Lower East Side biography project on? Great.
We are putting all of our LES biography projects, which I told you about before earlier, where I interview very highly self-individuated people, then we edit me out. They are there, and also I'm doing Facebook Live twice a week on Penny Arcade Superstar. I come by it honestly. 2 p.m. on Wednesdays, and on Sundays at 2 p.m. I do talks with you, because I love to be with you. Those are also all archived on our Patreon page. And we are no respecter of person. You can enroll in our Patreon for as little as $1 a month and have access to all of that work. We're streaming La Miseria. We're streaming The Last Will and Testament of Quentin Crisp from our 1995 show with Quentin in Vienna. Quentin chose me as the woman he most identified with. When they asked him why, he chose me as his soulmate. And when they asked him why, he said most people would be horrified to be publicly identified by me as their soulmate. But Miss Arcade is impervious to embarrassment.
I'd like to run one more clip,
Yeah,
perhaps.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
This would be the one from Old Queen.
Oh, yeah, great.
Do you want to do the setup on that a little bit?
Yeah. So Old Queen is in 2006, I started to become aware that I was suffering and other people were suffering from PTSD from AIDS. And I think I was the first person to start talking about PTSD and AIDS. And I'll tell you, I mean, you may think I'm like an egomaniac, but being 20 years ahead of your time has its drawbacks. Okay, so in this show, I wanted to talk about how I ended up in the gay world. And in this scene right now, I end up in the East Village in the criminal queer world, which people don't know about, the demi-monde. And I take my first LSD trip. And here it is.
Okay, great. Coming up in 1 second.
Okay.
Johnny looks at me and he goes, "Have you taken LSD?" And I go, "Not yet." And he reaches onto the table, picks up a tablet and hands it to me. Then he picks up a half-empty bottle of Coca-Cola and passes it to me. I understand he wants me to take it right now. After a while, I'm not there anymore. After a while, I'm not I'm. When I return, I look up. Johnny Pepin is turned into an evil Jane Mansfield. And I realize that I'm a cat.
Hail Atlantis. Way down below the ocean. Where I wanna be, she made me. Way down.
That's great.
I want to point out that all my work is improvised in front of live audiences. So that's how I make my work. And in this show, this was at Dixon Place in 2009, I was going through a divorce and I ended up improvising directly to Steve. And then I went on stage, and this is improvised. There is no script, so this is one of the things that I come from the Playhouse of the Ridiculous, which was an improvisational theater. And we would work for 3, 4, 5 months, improvising every night for a couple of hours. And then when I was no longer in the Playhouse, I started to improvise directly to the audience, because that was the only way I knew how to make work. And I'm watching this myself, and I'm watching it through your eyes, Jim. And I'm going like, wow, you have some chops, girl. Because I'm improvised. I know how to make theater iota by iota. And this is a show that we're developing now. It's going to be every single one of our shows is different. like I was saying to Jim when I was encouraging him to watch La Miseria, you cannot watch 10 minutes of a Penny Arcade show and know what the show is, because there's just so much in my work. And Theodora Skipateris, who's one of the artists who, along with Lee Brewer, the two artists who really supported my work, vocally supported my work. Theodora said to me in 1987, she was on a panel to give money from the NEA. She said, Penny, I really tried to get you money. And I told them, everybody else takes 20 minutes of work and spreads it out over 2 hours. But Penny Arcade takes 10 hours of work and she squeezes it into 2 hours. So it's very meaningful for me to be able to have this opportunity to show your audience my work.
What would you say is, what strikes me about your work, looking at it over time, exactly what you say, they're all different in terms of, certainly in terms of subject and ideas. And there's always a sort of wonderful mix of reverence and thinking, and also annihilation and irreverence. But formally, is there anything that you would say is consistent through all of these pieces and all of your exploration?
Yeah, my work is very highly structured. And people don't recognize that. Bill Forsythe, the great choreographer in Ballet-Tomaine, you know, from the Frankfurt Ballet, he saw me do an improvisation and he said, oh, I did a 1 hour improvised show. He said, oh, he goes, I love the structure. And I started crying. I said, oh my God, I said, you're the only person who's ever recognized how much structure is in my work. I naturally bring structure. My work is high content. It's journalistic. I am there. There's a Lehrstück in my theater. There's a teaching theater. You know, I am that person who's a reader and I'm interested in neuroscience. So I always try to give all of as much. I want to give, my theater has a coaching element. A lot of people who come and see my work because they're coming to get support, emotional support. And as a matter of fact, in the 90s, 2/3 of my audience was coming because they were recommended by their shrinks. I have this huge audience of therapists who were sending all their people to see my work. But the other thing, I never forget that I'm an entertainer. Never.
Right.
Never. So my work is comedic, and yet it has harsh realities in it. Like I said, I believe you go to the theater to experience that which you're unwilling or unable to experience.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely performance of your lived experience. I think Taylor's going to join us now.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yes.
I am. Hi, thank you for such a wonderful conversation. As we close out, Penny, I do have one question for you that's come up a few times.
Sure.
And that is, what are you doing to nourish yourself as an artist and a human during this time?
During this time, well, first of all, since March 18th, I've been very involved online with the public. This talk that I'm doing with New York Theater Workshop is very wonderful, but I've been doing this already since March 18th. And I'm doing, and that is my connection with you, the public. That has always been very important for me. I'm trying to eat correctly. I'm trying not to give in. I'm trying to use this for what Quentin Crisp used to say to me was the journey to the interior, that not altogether pleasant experience where we have to reflect on emptiness. I have to reflect on my own mortality. I'm 70 years old. I have to reflect on the not knowing. We don't know where we're coming out. And also, we're being given this in the shadow of the apocalypse. We're being given time. We're getting time back. You know, we're not all of us working 80 hours a week the way people were working before. You know, in my show, I have a new work in progress that Jim honored us with coming to see, called Notes from the Underground, which I hate to admit, but a lot of what's going on right now was in that show. but where I said, bring back the 40-hour work week. Like, what is happening? Why are we being driven like cattle? So, there is that positivity. We're with our closest friends. We're with our families. People are having dinner together. I'm having cocktail hour. I'm not a drinker, but I've started having my gin tonic, very light, I admit, mostly tonic, but with Stephen Marina, my collaborator. I have conversations on the phone with Jim. We've had, because of this, but why not have more conversations? And also, I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm doing a lot of reflecting. And this is in the shadow of the apocalypse, because we must take what is good. We must take what is good and support ourselves with what is good. And because we're going to need it when we find out what's not so good. I mean, not to be paranoid, but, there are people out there, people in power who would harness what is going on right now to usher in totalitarianism. We have already been dealing, with some pretty negative things. And, for all of us who went through 9/11, I think that is one of the things that's depressing us very much, because we were not prepared for 9/11. We didn't have the masks. Our first responders were not protected. And here we are, whatever it is, 20 years later, and we were not protected. Our first responders, our nurses, our doctors, we don't have what we need. So, I'm telling you, I live in fear of getting sick, and I know that other people do too. And as each of us hear about someone who we know, who's not old, who's young, who didn't have underlying illnesses, we know how close the veil is. As human beings, we are fragile, right? Jim, I want to bring you back in here, because Jim and I will be both going to theology school. People have always said to me that I needed to create a religion, And Lee Brewer, the great Lee Brewer from Mabu Mines, said to me that the only people he'd ever seen have the effect on the audience that he saw me have the effect on were the greatest preachers in Baptist churches. Because in my shows, the audience yells stuff, The audience is not quiet in my shows, And so Jim, maybe, I have had a very long ministry of my own that started with AIDS. I was a death mother. I am comfortable with death. You might as well be. We're all going to die. I've always had death on my left shoulder since I was a very young girl. And so, yeah, we will all remember this time. And as of right now, this moment, all of us here with New York Theater Workshop, we're going to remember where we were at this talk, what we knew at this talk, what changed after this talk. So I hope you'll join my Patreon and become familiar with my work. I'm planning on doing more live performances through Patreon. I'm also supporting Taylor Mack, Kristen Marding, Susan Laurie Parks with the Trickle Up, by the way, trickleup.org. I'm supporting Pangea, where many of us in the East Village have found a community there. We hope we'll be able to return. We want them to be there when we return. If you want to donate money to help keep them open and to pay some of the salaries of the kitchen help and the people who've lost their jobs, they have a GoFundMe for Pangea. You can all write to me personally if you'd like. It's Ms. like feminism, like we're hoping, pennyarcade@gmail.com. And the Patreon is Penny Arcade Performance Patreon. And come and see me on Facebook anytime. That's Penny Arcade Superstar. Love you guys. This has been such an honor for me, Jim.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me.
Jim, you are a treasure in the American theater I know that you're thinking about retiring, and I hope that you will have even more of a public life than you had as an as an executive director, as an artistic director. But we need a voice in the theater that is not from the not-for-profit industrial complex that only, I'm just going to say that only seeks to support the institution, but that supports the artists, the writers, the technicians, and that supports the public. And you are the man for that job. You are, because you know you have that history.
Thank you so much.
Why waste it by retiring? You know?
Well,
I'm going to make sure.
We'll see. But thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, thank you, Taylor Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Servita. And what happened to
Declan?
Yeah, Declan, the main tech guy. Okay.
Declan, thank you.
Too. And thanks, Steve Zentner, for creating the links and
for
all my help with my work.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Penny and Jim. Before we all virtually disappear, I do want to just let everyone know about some upcoming programming we have.
Yeah.
We hope that you will join us for our master classes on Mondays. A few upcoming ones: April 13th, a class with Jeremy O'Harris; April 20th, a class with Celia Keenan-Bolger; April 27th, director Liliana Blaine Cruz and designer Adam Rigg on collaboration.
Right.
We also have more fireside chats for you coming on Wednesdays. April 15th, a chat with Celine Song; April 22nd, a Sanctuary City reunion; April 29th, a conversation with composer-performers Martha Redbone and Aaron Whitby. And as I said at the top of this chat, this fireside chat and all of the workshop's virtual programming is offered free and is available to the entire NYTW community.
What about Doug Wright? Isn't there one with Doug Wright?
He just did this.
Yeah, last week.
And is it archived? Can we see it?
It is.
Yep.
These are all archived and you can watch on our Facebook page.
Wow.
We're streaming live as we're doing these Zooms. All the artists who contribute to these online gatherings are compensated, and we're continuing to pay staff. If you are in the position to support our work with a gift of $25, $10, $5, any amount, please consider donating. Your gift will help us continue our work through this crisis and beyond. If you're joining us on Zoom, you'll see a link to a short survey after this event. Please share your thoughts with us. You'll find a link to donate if you so choose at the end of the survey. And if you're tuning in on Facebook, you'll find the link to the survey in the comments. And you can also always make a contribution online at nytw.org, where you can find the schedule of upcoming programming as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you
for watching. Have a great rest of Wednesday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.